In this tutorial, we are making lifelike California paper poppies to decorate your home or for your next special occasion. And I will show you some fun tips about mixing cardstock and crepe paper together into one flower, because it doesn't have to be either or. Crafting is all about both and. The supplies for this project are medium weight cardstock, 90-gram crepe paper. You'll also want to have a pair of scissors or a cutting machine to cut out your templates. You'll need a hot glue gun, and you'll also want some liquid craft glue. You'll need something to curl your petals and leaves with, so a dowel rod or a scraper edge tool. You'll want some 24 gauge floral wire and some 18 gauge floral wire. You may also want to have floral tape and acrylic and paint pens, as well as distress inks or oxides with a blending brush are great for adding shading and coloring to your poppies. You may also want to have some sewing clips on hand. If you're cutting by hand, it's super helpful with the templates. If you love these paper poppies, you will also be obsessed with the perfect project pairings in our Cali Botanical collection, including succulents, prickly pear cactus, and agave plants. Get all the exclusive templates, early drops on tutorials, and unlimited access to all of our projects that make crafting for everyday moments and special life occasions easy and joyful. You can find details and links to all of these supplies, resources, and the template below in the video description. Okay, so one of the things about this design is that we're going to be mixing a cardstock center with a crepe paper petal. So I am going to cut my crepe paper petals out by hand just because I find it a little faster and easier, but if you're using a cutting machine like the Cricut Maker that works with a rotary blade, you can absolutely cut your crepe paper with that as well. And I do have some resources on that, which I'll link with this video. Now, aside from cutting our poppy petals here with our crepe paper, so this is just a template that I've cut out and it happens to be in yellow paper, and I'm going to cut it out there in just a minute. I do have the centers here as well. Now the centers I am going to cut out in cardstock, a yellow cardstock. So I'm using a medium weight cardstock material for this. And I have used my cutting machine for this particular template. I've already gone ahead and cut it out. And again, those templates are linked below for you. Now, if you are fully cutting by hand and you are not planning on using a cutting machine at all, then you could use cardstock or crepe paper for the center, and you could cut just a simple fringe center, which I will also show you once we get to that point. But I wanted to call out that I will be mixing cardstock here with my crepe paper petals for our California poppies. So let's first start by actually cutting out our poppy petal, okay? And then we'll go over our petal count that you're going to need for each flower. So poppies come in lots of different colors, oranges, yellows, sort of like peaches, bright red. Obviously, I'm going to go with red here. I'm using a fine Italian crepe paper here, and my resources will be linked below. But I love the 90-gram crepe paper. That's my favorite. It's that happy medium where it's not too thin, it's not too thick, and it works really well for crepe paper flowers. So what I like to do is you can print your templates out or you can cut them on a cutting machine. The option is up to you. I am going to be cutting these by hand. And I've already trimmed down some of my crepe paper here, but I will fold it over twice. So fold it in half. And I will place the template, in this case, this is just my template, over the top to make sure I have enough space here, right? And then I'm going to just cut down some sections. So we'll start with that. And this helps me maximize my material. Depending on how many you plan to make, you can get all of this kind of staged and prepped in batches. That way you can just build and work at each stage, which is what I like to do. Okay, so here is my piece of crepe paper. Now it's very important to note that the grain is going to be running vertically on your petal, vertically, up and down. So it's not running across, it's running up and down. Okay, that's a very key point to crepe paper flowers and being able to shape them. I'm going to fold this back over the way I had it before, and I'm going to place my template on top. You can hold it with your fingers if you want, or you can use a little sewing clip, which I like to do. You can use more than one if you want to, but I'll just use one there. And then I'll grab my scissors and cut this out. Now, you can use some regular scissors for this, but what I find that's super helpful is to actually use a pair of detail scissors, because I can just get more of that detail as I'm working around the petal here. So I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm just going to work my way around, kind of holding it and trimming off the excess of the petal. If you own a maker machine that works with the rotary blade, you can cut crepe paper on that. And I do have a help article on that if you're interested in learning more. I find for simple flowers like this that it takes less time to cut by hand in this case. So I don't always use that, but it is an option. Okay, I'm going to take my clip off now, put my template aside, and now we have 2 of our poppy petals, just like this, okay? And there is a top and bottom side to your paper, so just it's kind of hard to tell, but one side is going to look a little less grainy, and the other side that looks like it has deeper ridges and grains, that's actually the top of your crepe paper. Now, for one poppy, you're going to need to have 4 petals. So we want 4 petals cut out for one poppy, okay? For your centers, you're going to want to have 2 of the centers for one poppy. So that is your petal count. Now, if you do not have a cutting machine, and cutting this out by hand is going to be very hard. So I cut this on my cutting machine with cardstock paper. If you don't have that as an option, you're purely working with scissors, what I'm going to recommend is that you cut a fringe flower center, okay? And you can use cardstock for this, or you can use crepe paper. I find that it's going to look a little better with crepe paper just because of the nature of how the crepe paper behaves. So that would be something that deviates from my tutorial here in terms of me using this cardstock. But you can use either or. I'm going to feature it with crepe paper just so you can see the difference between the two, and you can choose whichever one works for you. So these pieces here are roughly 1 inch by about 3.5 to 4 inches wide here, and clearly we have 2 of them here. So what we can do is we can measure out here on our crepe paper. We can measure 4 inch by 1 inch pieces, or if we have a piece like I have here, which is closer to 8 inches already, we could just leave it all attached. The reason these aren't attached in the files because when you cut it with cardstock, it's just a little easier to roll up smaller pieces together, but with crepe paper, that does vary. So what I like to do is I'll just fold this over, and you can measure about 1 inch. I've been doing this long enough that I just tend to eyeball it, so do what makes you most comfortable. And we're going to have this strip here, which equals 2 of these in length. You can trim it apart if that makes you feel better. I'm going to leave mine together, and I'm just going to fold this over a couple of times, because what I want to accomplish is cutting with my pair of detail scissors, fringe all down the center here. And this works with cardstock too. You'll want to use a lighter weight cardstock. You may not be able to fold it over as many times, but I've done this with cardstock and crepe paper, so whichever you choose to go with can work. They're all just going to look and feel a little bit different. So I've got this opened up here, and I'm actually going to take my fingers and I'm just going to twist it a little bit so it doesn't look so boxy at the top. Kind of twisting. Okay, so this is your alternative to cut with a pair of scissors compared to this with the cardstock. It's going to still accomplish a very similar look. So I'm going to set this aside, and I'll show you one at the end with this actually built, but I'm going to set it aside for now and continue on with this method that I'm showing you here. The next step after you get your petals cut out is going to be to decide if you want to add any color to the center. Now this is a very dark paper. If you look at some of my other poppies here, you see with like our orange and yellows, we've able to use colors here that really stand out on the crepe paper. But with the red in particular, you actually need to have somewhat of a lighter color that kind of sits on top of the paper and really pops out. And so with that difference in mind, you have a couple different mediums that you're going to want to play with here. All right, so the next step is going to be to color your petals. This is optional, but with poppies in particular, they definitely always have that little burst of color to their centers. Now, you have a couple different options here. One is you can use a distress ink or oxide and an ink blending brush to swirl it onto the petal. Or you can use something like an acrylic paint marker, which I find very helpful when you're working with the darker papers. So one of the ones that I like here is like this orange, and it pairs well with this dark red. Whereas with my yellow one here, I ended up using a distress oxide instead. So you may want to protect your surface here. I have a piece of cardstock material here that's protecting my surface. And then these happen to be dual tips. So this side here is a brush marker, which I really like. And I'm going to come to the bottom center of this, and I'm going to start just brushing this on. And it might take some experimentation to see which one works best with your particular paper. So I'm seeing that this one's not showing very well, but I have another color here. So let's see how this one does. I'm gonna come in here, and this one's showing up a lot more, which I like. So I grabbed the wrong orange originally, and I'm just working from the center down here for a little bit of color. And then you can repeat this for all of your petals the same way. And even if you decide to cut these paper poppies in a cardstock material, which is totally an option, you can still follow suit. You can also just stick with that distress oxide or distress ink. And you want less of your petal colored than more. So notice how I am absolutely adding color, but 2/3 of the petal is left uncolored. Always work with the grain. Remember that grain is running vertically to the petal, so you're picking your marker up and working with the grain. And the same is true if you're adding distress inks or oxides to this as well. So for example, if I decided not to use the paint pen, but I wanted to use the distress oxide, I'm using a wild honey color here, and then I would use an ink blending brush. And then add some ink by swirling it. And again, think about your grain, so make sure you're not like stretching it as you go back and forth. You want to work with the grain. So you can add a little color right to the bottom here. Just like that, okay? So paint pen or distress ink or oxide both have a very nice look to them, and I mix and match. Okay, now let's move on to shaping. So there's a few different things you can do here. This one you could almost get away with just using your hands. Another option is to use like a thin wood dowel, a pen, a pencil, the end of a paintbrush, something that could be used as a curling tool. I also like to use my edge tool. This is a Cricut scraper tool, but these offset edge tools can come in handy. So it is just a few different ways you can use tools in your craft room to shape your petals. But let's start with something that's really simple. With the particular crepe paper petal that we have here, we want to be careful that we don't overstretch the crepe paper. When you look at a poppy, you're also going to see that the edges tend to go back ever so slightly, and then it opens up. So what I like to do is I like to come up here, and you can either take your finger like this and just sort of push the edges back. That's the easiest way. Or you can use something like a thin wood dowel, end of a paintbrush, or a pencil, and you can gently curl it back. Just try not to stretch the crepe paper too much yet. Very minimal on that. So it's a very slight curl backwards. Poppies also have a little bit of rhythm to their edges. So I like to take my forefinger and thumb and add just a little bit of a crimping to the ends. And then sometimes you have to go back and kind of encourage it to lean back again a bit. So you end up with something that's like that around the edging. And then you're going to come to the center here and focus mostly here in the middle center part, not the edges. And you're going to slightly stretch the crepe paper, ever so slightly. Less is more here on that, okay? Less is more. And then I might actually curl this back a bit more on the side, just with my fingers, kind of encouraging it at a particular angle here. Poppies are very open flowers. They often don't have a ton of petals. So you're going for something that looks like that. And then you're going to repeat this process here, giving it a little bit of a curl backwards. And give yourself grace because it's going to take some practice. And then you're going to do this 4 times. So it's 4 petals. You could try adding the crimping before you curl it back. I find sometimes that works. Other times I feel like it flattens the crimping back out by the time I actually manage to curl this back. But the good thing about poppy petals is they all kind of have their own vibe to them. Okay, so I have my 4 poppy petals all prepped and ready to go there. Now for the centers here, there's not a lot that you need to do, but again, a wood dowel or an edge tool here. I'm going to feature the edge tool. That's my favorite. But if you don't have this tool and you have something that's thin like this, then you can kind of come in here and just give it a light curl with your fingers. That way it's not so straight up and down and so stiff looking, and so you can give this a bit of a curl. Down is what we're looking for there. But I really like using the edge tool because it just does that for you very well. You can push with your thumb. Just don't pull too hard or you might pull off your tips of your flower there. And so I'm just going to use the edge tool. Okay, so that's our center prepped and ready to go. The next stage is to actually build our California poppy. So I have 18 gauge floral wire here. You can buy this on Amazon. It's my favorite. It's already covered in like this nice paper covering here. You can leave the stem completely full if you want in length, but I will trim mine down a bit because I never need this much stem and I find that it just gets in my way more times than not. So I'm going to trim that down a little bit there because that's plenty of height for my flower. So we're going to start with the center here and we're going to wrap this around. So we're literally going to tack this with a bit of glue and just roll it up around it here. If you want, and this is entirely optional, but if you feel it helps you to have a bit more thickness to the tip when you're gluing, take a pair of needle nose pliers and just fold the tip down a bit so it makes it thicker and then it becomes easier to glue to. That's just a bonus tip. I've done it with and without that though. So I'm going to grab my hot glue gun here and I'm going to put just a little bit of glue right on that tip and we'll take one of our centers and we'll place this on just like so. And I kind of just get it started at first like this. And then I'm going to add a bit more glue as I go here. And we're just going to roll it up. Nice and simple. Once you get the first one on, go ahead and just continue with the second one where you left off with the first. So we'll tack this down with a little bit more glue. Like that. And notice that I'm rolling this with the curls inward. They're not out, facing out. They're not curling away from me, but they're curling in. I'm just going to keep rolling this up here. Okay, so there's the result of my center. And then I recommend that you fluff this out just a little bit. And it's okay if a little bit of that green stem shows in the center. That's actually very much matches what a poppy can look like, where it has a touch of green right in the innermost center that you can see at certain angles. So don't shy away from that being in there. So I just like to fluff mine out a little bit so it has a bit more rhythm to it. And it's going to look something like that. Now it's time to add our poppy petals. So we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of glue right here at the base of this tip, and we're going to place this right on to that center just like so. And I want you to start by gluing 2 across from each other because that's going to create that rhythm that that poppy has with the most authenticity. So I'm going to place this petal on just like this. Got some glue strings here. So here's a look from the top. Here's kind of a look from the side. You can see where it is on the base. Okay, and then we're going to glue the next one directly across from this one. So directly across on the other side, like that. Okay. And then we're going to glue the last 2 petals in between the gaps between these 2. So the gaps here, we're going to glue that right over. And I'm going to glue this last one over here on the gap, so that the petals are all alternating each other. Now your poppy can stay nice and tight like this if you want, but I also encourage you to get these petals. They will relax over time because paper naturally relaxes over time. So do keep that into consideration, but play with allowing your paper to kind of bend out a bit here and let it open up, because a poppy is usually a fairly open looking flower. So we have something that looks more like this. And if it's bothering you at all, if there's too much floppiness somewhere, then come in with a little bit of glue and just tack it on the side. So I like to tack mine sometimes a little extra at the bottom there if it feels like that is just flopping way too much open. Like this one feels like it's gonna, especially with the like weight of time and gravity, it's really gonna open too much. So I'm gonna add just a little dot of glue here to give it a bit more support right as it transitions. All right, so here is a look at our very pretty poppy. Now let's work on some leaves, because the leaves, in my opinion, with the poppy, it really pulls everything together. It needs that pop of green, no pun intended there. Okay, so let's talk about leaves next. So I recommend that you cut these. I'm featuring cardstock here. You can also cut by hand. There's printable PDFs. If you're cutting by hand, be gentle with yourself. Give it a rough execution, but don't feel like you have to follow every curve and every line. It'll still look beautiful. So to make our leaves, I'm going to be sandwiching wire between two of these cutouts. So you'll need two cutouts for one leaf. And I'm going to sandwich wire between these. And I'm not going to use hot glue here because I don't want the chunkiness that hot glue comes with. Instead, I'm going to be using this precision craft glue here and featuring that for the leaves. You could also use this for your flowers, but I like the hot glue when I'm building the flower because I need things to grab very quickly in order for the structure to hold. So that's the difference there. Now I'm going to start by first making sure you have two cutouts and then make sure they're matched up on the correct side. Okay. And I'm going to grab my liquid craft glue here. So I'm going to start at the bottom here and I'm going to kind of draw a line with the glue up the center. And this is a precision tip, so it's coming out kind of in a fine line. And then I'm going to add some glue everywhere else too, just little swipes and dots of glue, which is going to hold all of this together. Okay, so just like that. And then we're going to take our wire here. So this is a wire that is a 24 gauge wire. So instead of using the thicker 18 gauge wire like we would use for the stem, we're using a thinner wire here. This is a 24 gauge wire. 24 gauge wire works really well for when you're doing this method of adding stems between two cutouts like this. And I'm going to place this other cutout on top. Okay, do your best with alignment, but don't worry if you don't get it absolutely perfect. This is like a light green cardstock paper here. If you want resources for the paper that I'm using in this tutorial, make sure you check out information below this video description. If you're watching on YouTube, that is linked directly below. And you're going to need to give this a little time to grab completely because it is liquid glue, so it will take a few moments to grab. And then you could just repeat this process as many times as you would like leaves. There's no right or wrong amount to the number of leaves you have on your flower. I like to put between 1 and 3, but you can do them without leaves too. I really do think with poppies that they look better with leaves than they do without, because it's just so much a part of what a poppy looks like. When you see it, it always has its leaves. Now you can leave your poppy leaves just like this if you want, or you could also add distress inks to them just like we did when we played around with the inks and the acrylic paints for the poppy flowers themselves. So I do prefer to add color to mine. For mine, I'm using this Lucky Clover color here and an ink blending brush. And I'm going to start at the bottom of the leaf here and add a little bit of color, working my way up. And I'm going to leave the tip a little bit untouched, so that it kind of looks like it's fading from darker to light, like it would in nature. And I'm going to do this on both sides of it as well. That way, no matter what side you see it from, it looks similar. You could follow suit with your poppies on that if you wanted to and color both sides of the petal. I find that when you look at poppies in nature, oftentimes the underside of the petal is not always colored, but there have been exceptions that I've seen too. So do with what you will, make that however you wish in that case. And the fact that we're working with paper flowers means we get to interpret it however we want, right? Now, to finish off our flower, I like to shape these leaves a little bit, and because that wire is in there, we can just bend them and curve them back a little bit, which is nice. And then we'll take our poppy here, and I'm going to also take a piece of floral tape. I'm just going to trim a piece of floral tape down. Floral tape is naturally sticky, but sometimes it can dry out. So sometimes I'll tack a bit of glue when I go to roll my floral tape, which is what you're going to see me do in a second here. So I'm going to place this right up against the base here, and I'm going to grab a little bit of that liquid glue again, and I'm actually just going to like dab it
so that the floral tape really stays put. And then I'm going to wrap this around. I'm going to start to wrap it down a little bit, and then I'll pause after a couple of wraps there. I'm going to add the other one in. So it's just slightly offset from the top. And we'll continue wrapping the rest of the way down. And I'm going to add just a little glue at the bottom there to make sure that that floral tape doesn't want to unravel at any point in time. Just like that. You can pull the leaves a little bit, have them come further away from the flower, play around with the petals a bit more. And there is our California paper poppy made with cardstock and crepe paper. If you love this project, be sure to download the template and all of the perfect project pairings from the Cali Botanical Collection. Not an A-star yet? Join below and unlock access to hundreds of collections, projects, and designs instantly and new makes every month. I'll see you there.